"Ma'am, you need to come to the front desk immediately." The gate agent's voice echoed through the airport intercom, and I watched as Karen's face went from smug satisfaction to pure panic in about 3 seconds flat. Just 20 minutes earlier, this woman had been loudly mocking my 12-year-old autistic son, calling him weird and disruptive for stimming with his fidget toy. She'd demanded my premium window seat, claiming she had a medical condition that required it. She'd even waved around what looked like an official boarding pass to prove her point. But now she was about to learn that karma doesn't just knock on your door, sometimes it announces your mistakes over the airport intercom for 300 strangers to hear. "My name is David, I'm 56 years old, and I've been dealing with entitled people my whole life. But what happened at Gate 23B last Tuesday? That was something else entirely. And by the time I was done, this woman would wish she'd never opened her mouth about my son. Let me take you back to where this all started. It was supposed to be a simple trip. My son Tommy and I were flying from Denver to visit my elderly mother in Phoenix. At 12, Tommy has high-functioning autism, and flying can be overwhelming for him. The sounds, the crowds, the unpredictability, it all adds up. That's why I always book us window seats when I can afford it. Tommy finds comfort looking out at the clouds, and it gives him something to focus on when the sensory overload gets too much. I'd saved up for months to upgrade our seats. Row 6, seats A and B. Tommy could have his window, and I'd be right there beside him. After 3 years of dealing with his autism diagnosis, the therapy appointments, the school meetings, the sleepless nights wondering if I was doing enough, this trip felt like a small victory. We arrived at the gate 2 hours early, just how Tommy likes it. He had his noise-canceling headphones around his neck, his weighted lap pad in his backpack, and his favorite fidget cube in his hands. To anyone paying attention, it was pretty obvious he was neurodivergent. But that never bothered me. Tommy's brilliant, kind, and sees the world in ways that constantly amaze me. The gate area was fairly quiet when we settled into our seats. Tommy immediately started his routine, arranging his items just so, checking his boarding pass 3 times, making sure his headphones were working. These little rituals help him feel secure in unpredictable environments. "Dad, is it a big plane?" he asked, his voice carrying that slight monotone quality that people sometimes mistake for rudeness, but I know is just how he processes the world. "Pretty big, buddy. Boeing 737. You'll love the view once we're up there." Tommy smiled and went back to his fidget cube, pressing the buttons in a specific sequence that probably made perfect sense to him. The soft clicking sounds were rhythmic, almost musical. I pulled out my book and settled in to wait for boarding. That's when she showed up. But what happened next would turn a peaceful wait into something I'll never forget. The woman, let's call her Karen because, honestly, she fit every stereotype, marched up to the gate counter like she owned the place. Mid-40s, perfectly styled blonde hair, designer purse clutched like a weapon. You know the type. The kind who asks to speak to managers before even ordering her coffee. I didn't pay much attention at first. Tommy was happy with his fidget cube. I was 3 chapters into a good thriller, and boarding wasn't for another hour. But then I heard her voice cut through the ambient airport noise like nails on a chalkboard. "Excuse me, I need to speak with someone about my seat assignment. This is completely unacceptable." The gate agent, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, looked up with the kind of practiced patience that comes from dealing with difficult passengers all day. "Of course, ma'am. What seems to be the problem with your seat? I specifically requested an aisle seat in the front of the plane, and you've given me some middle seat in row 18. I have a medical condition that requires easy access to the lavatory." Now, I'm not one to eavesdrop, but her voice was loud enough that half the gate area could hear. Tommy looked up from his fidget cube, his face showing that slight confusion he gets when people are upset for reasons he can't understand. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered. "Just someone having a bad day." The gate agent typed on her computer. "I see your reservation here, ma'am, and it shows you originally booked a middle seat in row 18. We don't have any record of a seat change request, and the front of the cabin is completely sold out." "That's impossible. I called 2 weeks ago and specifically requested an upgrade due to my medical needs." Her voice was getting louder, and I noticed Tommy's hands had started moving faster on his fidget cube. The clicking sounds increased in frequency, a sure sign he was getting anxious. "I understand your frustration, ma'am. Let me see what options we have available." Options? I don't want options. I want results. Do you have any idea how much money I spend with this airline every year? That's when Tommy made a small sound, not quite a whimper, but the kind of noise he makes when he's starting to feel overwhelmed. The woman's aggressive tone was cutting through his emotional defenses, and I could see the signs of an impending meltdown building. I stood up and gently placed my hand on Tommy's shoulder. Hey, want to walk over to the window and look at the planes? But as we got up to move, that's when everything took a turn for the worse. As Tommy and I walked past the gate counter, his fidget cube slipped from his hands and clattered to the floor. In his rush to pick it up, he bumped slightly into Karen's designer luggage. Watch it, she snapped, jerking her bag away like Tommy was going to contaminate it. Sorry, Tommy mumbled, his face already starting to flush red, the first sign of emotional overload. Tommy, you're fine, I said quickly, picking up his fidget cube and guiding him toward the windows. Let's go look at that Southwest plane landing. But Karen wasn't done. Some parents really need to teach their kids basic manners, she said loudly, clearly intending for us to hear. Running around, making noise, bumping into people. It's completely inappropriate. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept walking. Tommy hadn't done anything wrong. A slight bump and a dropped toy hardly constituted running around. But I've learned that sometimes the best response to ignorance is simply to remove yourself from the situation. At the window, Tommy pressed his face against the glass, his breathing starting to regulate as he watched a baggage cart zip across the tarmac. The repetitive movement seemed to calm him. Dad, why was that lady mad at me? He asked in his straightforward way. She wasn't really mad at you, buddy. Sometimes adults get frustrated about other things and take it out on people around them. It's not your fault. But I said sorry for bumping her bag. You did great, Tommy. You were polite and thoughtful. We spent the next 20 minutes at the window, Tommy narrating the various airport vehicles and their functions in the detailed way that neurotypical people might find excessive, but I find absolutely fascinating. His knowledge of aircraft mechanics and airport operations rivals that of most airline employees. But our peace was about to be shattered again, because Karen had just gotten some very bad news from the gate agent. Sir, excuse me. I turned around to see Karen marching toward us, her face flushed with frustration. The gate agent was watching nervously from behind the counter. Are you in seats 6A and 6B? She demanded. Yes, we are. I kept my voice calm and even. I need to ask you to switch seats with me. I have a medical condition that requires me to sit in the front of the plane, and those are the only suitable seats available. I glanced down at Tommy, who had gone very still, another sign that his anxiety was spiking. I'm sorry, but we can't do that. My son needs the window seat for sensory reasons, and I need to be next to him. Sensory reasons? Her voice dripped with disdain. What does that even mean? My son is autistic, and the window seat helps him manage sensory overload during the flight. I shouldn't have had to explain Tommy's diagnosis to a stranger, but I hoped it might generate some basic human compassion. Instead, Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Every parent claims their kid has some special need these days. He looks perfectly normal to me. The word normal hit like a slap. Tommy's hand found mine and squeezed tight. Ma'am, I'm not going to discuss my son's medical needs with you. We're keeping our assigned seats. This is ridiculous. I have an actual medical condition, not some made-up excuse. I'm willing to compensate you for the inconvenience. She reached into her purse and pulled out two $20 bills. $40. That's more than fair for a simple seat swap. Tommy looked up at me with wide eyes. Even at 12, he understood the insult implicit in her offer. The seats aren't for sale, I said firmly. We're staying put. That's when Karen's mask of polite entitlement completely fell away. Fine, but I want you to know that your little charade isn't fooling anyone. She gestured dismissively at Tommy, who had started the subtle rocking motion he uses to self-regulate when stressed. Look at him. There's nothing wrong with that kid that proper discipline wouldn't fix. All this autism nonsense is just an excuse for bad parenting. The words hit me like a physical blow. In 3 years since Tommy's diagnosis, I'd heard ignorant comments before, but never delivered with such deliberate cruelty. Ma'am, you need to stop. Now. What? I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. That weird rocking thing he's doing? The constant fidgeting? She pointed at Tommy's fidget cube. That's not a medical condition, that's a kid who's been allowed to run wild. Tommy's rocking increased slightly, and I could see tears starting to form in his eyes. Dad? His voice was small and confused. You're fine, Tommy. There's nothing wrong with you. I turned back to Karen, my voice dropping to what my ex-wife used to call my dangerous quiet tone. Ma'am, you need to walk away. Right now. Or what? You'll call security? For what? Telling the truth. A few other passengers had started to notice the commotion. I saw an elderly couple exchange concerned glances, and a businessman looked up from his laptop with obvious disapproval. The truth is that you're harassing a child with a disability, and you're about 30 seconds away from me calling airport security. Karen laughed an ugly, bitter sound. Disability? Please. In my day, kids like that were just called spoiled brats, and they learned to behave or faced consequences. Kids like what? I asked, my voice getting dangerously quiet. You know exactly what I mean. Weird kids. Different kids. Kids who can't sit still and act normal. Tommy's quiet sniffling broke my heart. This woman was systematically destroying his self-confidence with surgical precision. But what she didn't know was that she was about to hand me the perfect weapon for revenge. Look, Karen said, reaching into her purse with exaggerated gestures, I don't have time for this nonsense. I'm going to show you something that will settle this once and for all. She pulled out a boarding pass and waved it in front of my face. See this? This is my real boarding pass. It shows seats 6C and 6D right next to your precious window seats. The airline made an error with their system, but I have the correct documentation right here. I glanced at the boarding pass, and something immediately struck me as odd. The paper quality looked different, slightly off-white instead of the airline's standard bright white. The font seemed just a little too bold, and the seat numbers looked like they'd been printed separately from the rest of the text. But here's the thing about having a kid with autism: you develop an eye for details. Tommy's hyper-focused attention to patterns and inconsistencies has rubbed off on me over the years. And this boarding pass had inconsistencies written all over it. This boarding pass shows seats 6C and 6D, I said carefully. But this is a Boeing 737. Rows 1 through 9 only have 4 seats A, B, C, and D on each side. There is no 6C and 6D, those would be the middle seats, and in this aircraft configuration, the middle seats in row 6 are B and E. Karen's confident expression flickered for just a moment. You're wrong. I know what my boarding pass says. Actually, I'm not wrong. I fly this route 6 times a year to visit my mother, always on this same aircraft type. Would you like me to ask the gate agent to verify? That won't be necessary, she said quickly, snatching the boarding pass back. I'll handle this myself. She turned and marched back toward the gate counter, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the terminal floor. I knelt down next to Tommy, who was still quietly crying. Hey, buddy, look at me. He raised his eyes, and I saw not just hurt, but confusion. At 12, Tommy understands that he's different, but he's never had someone attack those differences so directly. That woman said some very mean things. But I need you to know that every single word she said was wrong. You're not weird. You're not broken. You're perfectly, wonderfully you. But Dad, why did she say those things? Sometimes people are mean to others because they're unhappy with themselves. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it's not about you. Tommy nodded slowly, the way he does when he's processing complex emotional information. Are we still going to sit in the window seats? Absolutely. Those are our seats, and we're keeping them. What I didn't tell Tommy was that I was also planning to make sure Karen got exactly what she deserved. Because I had a pretty good idea about what was going to happen when she tried to use that fake boarding pass. 20 minutes later, the gate agent announced that they were beginning the boarding process for passengers with special needs and families with small children. That's it, buddy, I said to Tommy. Ready to get on the plane? Tommy carefully packed his fidget cube into his backpack, put on his noise-canceling headphones, and stood up with the methodical precision that helps him navigate new situations. As we approached the gate counter, I could see Karen hovering nearby, obviously waiting for her moment to pounce. The gate agent, her name tag read Jessica, smiled warmly at Tommy. How are you doing today, sweetie? She asked. I'm good, Tommy replied in his slightly formal way. I like flying because I get to see the clouds from the top. Jessica's smile widened. That's wonderful. I bet you know a lot about airplanes. Boeing 737-800 series, Tommy said immediately. CFM 56-7B engines, maximum seating capacity 189 passengers, cruising altitude typically 35,000 feet. Wow, you definitely know your aircraft. As Jessica scanned our boarding passes, I noticed her glance over at Karen, who was positioning herself right behind us in line. Sir, Jessica said quietly, is everything okay? I noticed there was some kind of issue earlier. We're fine, thank you. Just looking forward to our flight. But as we walked down the jet bridge, I heard Karen's voice behind us, loud and confident. Excuse me, Jessica? I need to speak with you about a seating error. I slowed our pace just enough to hear what came next, and what I heard made me smile grimly. Ma'am, I need to verify your boarding pass. Could you please step aside for a moment? There's nothing to verify. I have my correct boarding pass right here. I understand, but our system is showing some discrepancies, and I need to resolve them before you can board. I guided Tommy onto the plane, but not before I heard Karen's voice rise to a near shout. This is absolutely ridiculous. I demand to speak to a supervisor. Tommy looked up at me with curiosity. Dad, why is that lady yelling again? Because she's about to learn a very important lesson about honesty. We found our seats 6A and 6B, just as they should be, and Tommy immediately pressed his face to the window. Dad, I can see the baggage carts. That's great, buddy. But my attention was focused on the commotion still happening at the gate. Through the aircraft door, I could hear raised voices and what sounded like a supervisor being called. And that's when I realized that Karen's day was about to get much, much worse. About 10 minutes after we'd settled into our seats, I saw a man in a supervisor's uniform walk past our row toward the front of the plane. He was followed by a woman I didn't recognize, probably someone from airport security. Tommy was happily identifying different types of service vehicles on the tarmac, so I stood up and casually walked toward the front of the aircraft, pretending to use the lavatory. As I passed the galley area, I could hear a heated conversation coming from the jet bridge. The aircraft door was still open, and the voices carried clearly. Ma'am, we've examined your boarding pass, and there are several issues we need to discuss. Issues? What issues? I already explained about the seating error. Well, for starters, the seat numbers you've printed don't exist on this aircraft. Our Boeing 737s don't have seats 6C and 6D. There was a pause. That must be another system error. Ma'am, we've also noticed that the paper stock doesn't match our standard boarding passes, the barcode won't scan in our system, and the font appears to have been altered. Another pause, this one longer. I don't understand what you're implying. We're not implying anything, ma'am. We're stating that this boarding pass has been fraudulently altered, and we need to discuss how that happened. I heard Karen's voice, no longer confident, but getting higher and more desperate. This is insane. I'm a frequent flyer. I would never. There must be some mistake. The mistake, ma'am, was attempting to board an aircraft with falsified documentation. We're going to need you to come with us to resolve this situation. I quickly returned to my seat, where Tommy was now narrating the activities of a fuel truck with his typical encyclopedic detail. Dad, did you know that jet fuel has a freezing point of minus 40 degrees Celsius? I did not know that, buddy. That's fascinating. But internally, I was processing what I just heard. Karen hadn't just been rude and cruel, she'd actually attempted to commit fraud by altering her boarding pass to try to steal our seats. The enormity of what she'd done was staggering. Not only had she viciously attacked my son for his autism, but she'd also broken federal law in her attempt to get what she wanted. And now she was about to face the consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're addressing a documentation issue and will begin boarding again shortly. The captain's voice came over the intercom, and I could see several passengers looking around with confusion and mild annoyance. Tommy looked up from the window. Dad, why aren't more people getting on the plane? There's just a small problem they need to fix first. Nothing to worry about. Through the window, I could see what looked like airport security escorting someone away from the gate area. The person was gesticulating wildly and appeared to be arguing, but they were too far away for me to make out details. About 5 minutes later, Jessica appeared at our row. Mr. Patterson, could I speak with you for a moment? I stepped into the aisle, and she walked me a few feet away from Tommy. Sir, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened earlier. I witnessed part of the interaction between you and another passenger, and I want you to know that her behavior was completely unacceptable. Thank you, I appreciate that. I also wanted to let you know that the passenger in question has been removed from the flight. It turns out she had altered her boarding pass in an attempt to claim seats that weren't assigned to her. I see. Security is handling the situation now. Fraudulent documentation is a serious matter, especially in an airport environment. Jessica glanced over at Tommy, who was back to watching the tarmac activities. Your son seems like a wonderful kid. I'm sorry he had to witness that kind of behavior. Thank you. He's pretty resilient. We're going to resume boarding now. And sir, I've made a note in your file about this incident. If you ever fly with us again and have any issues, please don't hesitate to ask for me specifically. As I returned to my seat, Tommy looked up with curiosity. Dad, was that about the mean lady? Yes, buddy, it was. What happened to her? I sat down and considered how to explain this in a way that a 12-year-old could understand without getting too caught up in concepts like fraud and federal law. Well, it turns out she wasn't being honest about her seat assignment. She tried to trick the airline into giving her our seats by changing her ticket. Tommy processed this with his typical methodical approach. So she was lying? Yes, she was lying. And now she can't fly on the airplane? That's right. Tommy nodded slowly. That's what happens when you're not honest. Exactly. But I wasn't quite done with Karen yet. Because what happened next was going to be the perfect cherry on top of this Justice Sunday. About 20 minutes later, as we were finally taxiing away from the gate, the captain came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. I want to personally apologize for our departure delay today. We had to address a security situation involving a passenger who attempted to board with fraudulent documentation. I could hear murmurs throughout the cabin as passengers processed this information. For those of you who may have witnessed the earlier disturbance at the gate, I want you to know that we take all forms of harassment and fraudulent activity very seriously. The passenger involved has been banned from flying with our airline and will be facing appropriate legal consequences. Tommy looked up at me with wide eyes. Dad, is he talking about the mean lady? I think he might be, buddy. But Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished. I also want to address something that troubles me deeply. Several crew members witnessed this individual making disparaging comments about a young passenger with autism. As the father of a child with special needs myself, I want to be absolutely clear. Every passenger on this aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their neurological differences. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I hadn't expected this level of public support. To the young man in seat 6A, I heard you know quite a bit about aviation. After we reach cruising altitude, if your dad says it's okay, I'd love to have you visit the cockpit. Tommy's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Dad, did you hear that? Can I go to the cockpit? We'll see, buddy. But Captain Rodriguez still wasn't done. And finally, I want to remind all our passengers that differences should be celebrated, not mocked. The young man who was targeted today showed more class and dignity in 10 minutes than some adults manage in a lifetime. The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. I could see passengers looking around, trying to figure out who the captain was talking about. A few seemed to put it together and smiled warmly in our direction. Tommy, being Tommy, was confused by the attention. Dad, why is everyone clapping? Because people appreciate kindness, buddy. And you were very kind today, even when someone was being mean to you. As the applause died down, I realized that what had started as one of the worst airport experiences of our lives had turned into something pretty extraordinary. But the best part was still to come. True to his word, Captain Rodriguez invited Tommy to visit the cockpit once we reached cruising altitude. Tommy's excitement was palpable. He spent the entire climb asking me detailed questions about avionics systems that I definitely couldn't answer. When Jessica came to escort us to the front of the plane, Tommy carefully packed his fidget cube and put on his most serious expression. Dad, I need to be very professional for this. I know you will be, buddy. The cockpit visit was magical. Captain Rodriguez and his company pilot spent 20 minutes explaining various instruments and systems, and Tommy asked questions that impressed both pilots with their technical sophistication. How do you calculate fuel consumption at different altitudes? What's the maximum operating altitude for this specific aircraft variant? Do the CFM56 engines have variable inlet guide vanes? Captain Rodriguez looked at me with amazement. Does he want to be a pilot when he grows up? Actually, he wants to be an aerospace engineer. With this level of technical knowledge at 12, he'll be designing the planes I'm flying in 20 years. As we prepared to return to our seats, Captain Rodriguez knelt down to Tommy's level. Son, I want you to remember something. That lady today tried to make you feel bad about being different. But your differences aren't weaknesses, they're superpowers. Your brain works in ways that let you understand complex systems that most adults can't even begin to comprehend. Tommy nodded solemnly. Will I always be different? Yes, and that's exactly what makes you special. The world needs people who think differently, who see patterns others miss, who ask questions nobody else thinks to ask. As we walked back to our seats, Tommy was practically glowing with pride and excitement. Dad, he said my brain was like a superpower. He's absolutely right, buddy. But what happened next made this whole experience even more satisfying. Word had apparently spread throughout the cabin about what had happened at the gate. As we made our way back to our seats, several passengers stopped us. An elderly woman in row 8 touched my arm gently. Excuse me, are you the father and son from the gate incident? Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to say how impressed I was with how you both handled that situation. That woman was absolutely awful, and your son showed incredible maturity. A businessman across the aisle leaned over. I have a nephew with autism. What that woman said was disgusting. Your boy seems like a great kid. Even the flight attendants got involved. The head flight attendant, a woman named Margaret who'd probably been dealing with difficult passengers for 30 years, stopped by our row during the drink service. Honey, she said to Tommy, I heard you got to visit the cockpit. What did you think? It was amazing. Did you know that the autopilot system has 3 separate flight management computers for redundancy? Margaret laughed. I did not know that, but now I do. You're pretty smart, aren't you? My dad says being smart is different from being wise, but I'm working on both. Well, you seem pretty wise to me too. As Margaret continued down the aisle, Tommy looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. Dad, why are all these people being so nice to us? Because most people are good, buddy. When they see someone being treated unfairly, especially a kid, it brings out the best in them. So the mean lady actually made something good happen? Leave it to Tommy to find the philosophical silver lining. In a way, yes. Sometimes bad situations help us see how many good people there are in the world. Tommy nodded and returned to his window, watching the landscape pass by far below. But I wasn't quite ready to let this go, because I just thought of the perfect way to put a bow on this whole experience. While Tommy was absorbed in watching the geography change beneath us, I pulled out my phone and opened Facebook. I'm not usually one for social media drama, but this situation felt different. This was about standing up for my son and potentially helping other parents in similar situations. I started typing. To the woman at Denver International Airport, Gate 23B, who told my 12-year-old autistic son that he was weird and just needed better discipline. Thank you. Thank you for showing my son exactly the kind of person he should never aspire to be. Thank you for demonstrating that kindness and cruelty are choices we make every day. Thank you for providing a perfect example of what happens when you let entitlement and ignorance guide your actions. And thank you for being stupid enough to try to board a plane with a fake boarding pass, which led to your arrest and permanent ban from the airline. My son asked me why you were so mean to him. I told him that some people are unhappy with their own lives and try to make themselves feel better by hurting others. He thought about this for a moment and said, that sounds really sad for her. 12 years old, and he has more emotional intelligence than you'll ever possess. Tommy got to visit the cockpit today because the captain wanted to personally apologize for your behavior. The entire flight crew went out of their way to make sure he felt welcomed and valued. Dozens of passengers took time to tell him what a great kid he is. Your 10 minutes of cruelty resulted in hours of kindness from strangers. Your attempt to steal our seats led to you being escorted away in handcuffs. Your mockery of his autism led to him being celebrated for his differences. In every possible way, your actions backfired spectacularly. But here's what I really want you to know, Tommy forgives you. Because that's the kind of person he is. He sees the good in everyone, even people who don't deserve it. I, however, am not quite as forgiving. I hope your legal troubles serve as a reminder that actions have consequences, and that targeting children with disabilities is not just morally reprehensible, it's also really stupid when you're simultaneously committing federal crimes. To all the parents out there dealing with similar situations, stand your ground. Protect your kids, and remember that for every cruel person in the world, there are dozens of good ones waiting to help. Autism acceptance, stand up to bullies, parenting win. I hesitated for a moment before hitting post, then decided that sometimes the truth needs to be shared, even when it's uncomfortable. Within minutes, the post started getting likes and comments. Within an hour, it had been shared dozens of times. But the real victory wasn't online validation. It was sitting right next to me, peacefully watching clouds and calculating their altitude based on their formation patterns. As our plane began its descent into Phoenix, Tommy looked up from his window with the kind of serious expression he gets when he's processing complex thoughts. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy. Why do some people think being different is bad?" It's the kind of question that cuts right to the heart of everything, delivered with the straightforward curiosity that makes Tommy who he is. That's a really good question. I think some people are scared of things they don't understand, and instead of trying to learn, they decide that different must mean wrong. But that doesn't make sense. Different just means not the same. You're absolutely right. Different is just different. Like how I can remember all the specifications for different aircraft, but I have trouble understanding why people say things they don't mean. Exactly like that, your brain is wired to see patterns and details that other people miss. That's not better or worse than other ways of thinking, it's just your way. Tommy considered this, his fingers absently working through a pattern on his fidget cube. "The mean lady said I wasn't normal. What do you think about that?" "I think normal is kind of boring. Normal people can't tell you the maximum takeoff weight of a Boeing 737 or explain why airplane windows are round instead of square." I laughed. "You're absolutely right about that. And normal people probably wouldn't notice that her boarding pass had the wrong font." "Probably not. So maybe being not normal is actually better?" "I think being Tommy is perfect, whether that's normal or not." He smiled and returned to the window, where the lights of Phoenix were starting to twinkle in the desert darkness. As I watched my incredible kid calmly identifying the different types of aircraft on approach to Sky Harbor, I realized that Karen had actually given us a gift. Not intentionally, of course she'd meant to hurt us. But instead, she'd created an opportunity for Tommy to see how many people were willing to stand up for him, how valued he was, and how his differences